All right, so try to start pretty promptly every day. We're like a minute here early, but everyone quieted down, so I figure you're ready to go. Um, so I'm Professor Lantis. Your professor for this semester. So this is my fourth year here at IU. I was over, for those of you from Indiana, I was over at Ball State. If you're not from Indiana, you probably have no idea where that's at. But I was there for like 8 years teaching similar courses to what we're going to have here. So this is fundamentals of economics for business. I tend to kind of call it an accent sometimes microeconomics because that's primarily what we're going to focus on. Um, so today we'll go through like a brief, I should say brief, we'll go through kind of the syllabus, kind of typical like syllabus day one. We'll kind of just start talking about economics and kind of what we're going to be looking at this semester. Um, so kind of start diving into that. Now, one thing you'll notice, and I'll mention this later on as well, I always kind of start class with Zoom, right? So the whole time I'm talking, I've got Zoom just running in the background. Now, I don't even remember I have it going a lot of the times, and I tend to sometimes walk around. So you'll get some of what we do captured in class if you do have to miss a class, but it's just going to be the audio and whatever is up here on the screen. So a lot of the times, what I'll do in class is something like this. Might try to start using the iPad a little bit more. I just have a really hard time writing on it. So I kind of default to kind of paper. I'll draw out some of the different graphs that we're going to use. None of this is going to be captured in the recording, right? So I always call these kind of Zoom recordings like an imperfect substitute for class. If you do have to miss because you're sick or something, you can always go back and review them, but they're not going to have everything we do in class. And once again, the audio is not going to be perfect because I sometimes walk away over here, and if you're watching the video later on, you're like, I can't hear anything he's saying. Probably won't walk that far. But I just want to kind of mention that if you see that running in the background, that's why. Okay. So we'll go back here. So we'll start out things here. Dive in. So kind of an overview of the class, what you're going to need for this class. So we'll talk a little more about the registration steps, but there is an e-text assigned, and you will need it to complete some of the assignments for the class. So hopefully many of you have kind of already purchased this through the bookstore. If you haven't yet, that's okay. You can still get on and kind of purchase that. It's quite a bit cheaper than like an actual physical textbook. And it has some nice features where I can embed questions into it. So we will be using that throughout the semester. It's called Top Hat. That's where the platform the book is on. You'll need to be able to access Canvas for the course. And then I think do I have here? Yeah. So something that we'll do is I use Canvas to essentially do in-class quizzes. I'll describe what that looks like here in a second. So that means that when you're in class, you need some device that you can access Canvas on. So I know that these desks are a little small, so the laptop will work, but you don't like that because there's too much going on. You need a tablet. You can use your phone to access Canvas. But we'll do these kind of small quizzes in class, so you'll need something to be able to access Canvas in class. Okay. I put up here some additional outside sources. So this is OpenStax. We've got a bunch of different microeconomics textbooks and other things. I don't expect that most of you, if any of you, will use this, but I just want to throw up as many additional resources as I possibly can that I'm aware of. And also when it comes to the exams, so you might need them in class, but in class, it doesn't matter. You can use the built-in calculator on your phone, which all we're going to be doing in this class is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. That's as far as that you would kind of need a calculator for. But on the exams, you obviously can't use your phone, right? So you will need a physical calculator if you want one on the exam. And I always kind of say anything that's a non-graphing calculator, right? So I say that because I know you can store notes and things and you can type text in those. So I just like a scientific calculator or lower. But really, all you would ever need is like a dollar store four function calculator for those exams, okay? Every single week, I'll put up the slides on Canvas. So if you want to have them pulled open as we're kind of going through things in class, that's fine. If you want to print them out, I guess you can do that. But I post what I call a skeleton version of the slides. So I leave some things out on purpose, right? Kind of having some more value added to actually attending class to be able to fill that in. I also might have some what I think are funny pictures and things that I'll add in that I don't put up prior to class. But those skeleton slides will always be posted. Basically, we have class Tuesday, Thursday. I'll post them Thursday after class so that you'll have them in plenty of time before we start the next week on Tuesday. Okay. I also have already mentioned I have Zoom running in the background here. So I know there's like Kaltura and stuff that the university does. I just do everything through YouTube because I figure you all know how to get to YouTube. And so if you search Professor Lantis, it's probably the easiest way. I put up the link to this section's actual playlist. But if you search Professor Lantis, I should be the first thing that pops up. I have playlists for every single section this semester. So I have 3 sections of this class. If you want things specific to your section, right, where the times line up, then you would go to this playlist. All right, so we're what, 9317, I believe is our section number. Okay. So what do you guys really care about? Is how you get the grade that you want, right? Or how you get the grade that Kelly wants you to get for most of you, right? So kind of walking through this class is admittedly pretty heavily weighted on exams. Okay. So you're in college now, get used to this. But we have 2 midterms and a final. So as in total, I think I have the 2 midterms are 23%, final is 28. Talk about why here in a little bit in a second, why that final is weighted a little bit more. But you know, that's a pretty good chunk of your grade. All right, so just under 75%. Okay. So that means these exams are what? Very important, right? So when we get closer to these exam dates, every single exam that Tuesday before, so they're going to be on Thursdays for those midterms, we'll basically just have a class of review. I'll be giving you practice problems for those exams. You really need to make sure that you're preparing well for those exams, okay? 12% is going to come from these weekly Canvas quizzes that I'll assign to you. So basically every single week we cover a module or like a new chapter of that e-text, okay? So after we cover the material, we will then have a weekly quiz over that. Right? So we'll have one of those every single week, except for exam weeks, and they'll be at 12% of the total grade. So not as much as the exams, but a pretty good amount of the grade in the course. Right? We'll also have something called Canvas discussions. I'll go into each one of these more in depth here in a second. They're going to be 8%, class readings, 2%, class participation 4%. Okay? So these last 2 categories might seem like they're a really low percent of your grade in the class, but I can tell you right now, if you start missing these, this small percent, and it matters a lot. I know I don't know all the admission standards because economics were not in Kelly, but I have a pretty good idea after teaching this course quite a few times. I know Kelly's always changing things, but they have very like hard and fast grades that you need to get if you're a pre-admit versus direct, etc. And if you're on that bubble, getting as many points possible in these 2 categories, which you'll see here in a second, should be easier points. I know I shouldn't call points in this class easy or hard, but that's going to be a way that you can kind of make sure if you're on that cutoff, you're kind of getting bumped up to that next grade. So don't take these light. All right. So diving into each of these categories a little bit more, we're going to see, I kind of mentioned those 2 midterms, 23%, and that's because we have 25 multiple choice questions, whereas that final, you're going to have a few more questions, right? Now we also have 2 hours, so have a little bit more time. I can go, you know, by the time we get to the end of the course, things that we're going to be looking at the topics are going to be a little more difficult, and that's why that final is weighted a little bit heavier. Okay. So I've got the exam dates. These are there's a Word document of the syllabus that we're kind of reviewing that's already on Canvas. So it's just more extensive in the way that it's describing, kind of explaining all these types of assignments. But that syllabus has the dates in there. I put them up here as well. You need to let me know well in advance, right? At least a week in advance if you're going to have conflicts with these dates. If you already know you're going to have conflicts with these dates, better let me know right now, right? Not right now, but right after class, okay? And so we will have these in-class exams. So we'll be in our usual room, usual meeting time. We'll talk more about the specifics as we get closer to them, but you need to make sure you can be in class at the scheduled time to take these 2 midterms. And then the final exam, how many of you are freshmen? Like almost all of you, yeah. So the way that IU does their final exams, depending on when the class meets, they have like allotted time slots. So for 251, it's going to be that Thursday from 3 to 5. That's just what the university assigns. We will likely not be in this room. I don't know yet because they don't release the locations until towards the end of the semester. But it will be that 2-hour time block. That's like set in stone. Okay. So make sure you're making sure that you can be available during that time to show up. Okay. You'll notice all the exams are kind of multiple choice. So, as we kind of progress through the semester, each of those exams, I'll give you practice problems, like basically a practice exam. So you'll kind of get an idea about what the questions will look like. Make sure you know those kind of backwards and forwards. We'll do some review, like I said, for the midterms. They're on Thursdays. That Tuesday class before will just be for review. We're reviewing those practice exams, any other questions that people have, you can bring to those. And then the final, well, actually the whole week before the final exam week, we'll be doing review in those 2 class periods. Okay, so I'm trying to set you up, as long as you're attending class, to kind of be successful in those assessments. Also, I tend to get going and rolling when I talk. My wife says all the time. So if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. I want to make sure we're all things are clear to that. Okay. So the next kind of highest weighted category are these weekly Canvas quizzes. So I already mentioned, we're basically going to cover a different module of the e-text every single week. There's one exception. I combine modules 5 and 6 because module 5 and 6 are a little bit shorter. So I kind of combine them into one. But basically every week we'll cover a module. And then after class on Thursday, I'll post up, excuse me, a weekly quiz, right? That'll cover the material that we went through that week. It'll be then due by the end of the day on Monday, right? So before we meet in class the next week on Tuesday, right? That night before, you'll need to make sure that you've completed that quiz. Okay, so you've got quite a few days to kind of plan on when exactly you want to take it. I think as the semester progresses, you'll start to see what works in your schedule when you want to kind of sit down and take these exams. Once you start them on Canvas, you will have 60 minutes to complete them. So another thing that I'm going to use on these is called a lockdown browser. So basically, it doesn't allow you to access any other web pages while you're taking the exam. Usually there's no issues, kind of compatibility with any devices that you're using for that. But that first quiz, I'll have it set in there. So hopefully you can kind of see what that's going to look like. But yeah, there's no pausing, right? It's once you start, the clock starts running, you have 60 minutes to complete and submit that quiz. So generally they're about 12 questions. I think for this first week, I have 14. So there's a little bit of change in length there, depending on kind of the module that we're looking at, but usually around 12 questions on average. So you've got about, 5 minutes per question. You have all of your notes in front of you. Excuse me. So you've got more resources than you would in the exams. These should be quite a bit easier than the exams, but then they're also good questions to go back and review as we get closer to those exams as well. Every single week, I will release a set of practice problems. So after class today, I have a section right after this. When I say after class, a little bit later when I'm done with my next section, I'll actually put up the practice problems. In fact, you can't see them right now, but they already exist on Canvas. Okay, so I'll kind of have those released after class. You'll be able to kind of start preparing for the week number 1 quiz. So that won't be released until after we meet on Thursday and finish class up and I finish my second section. So these are due by the end of the day Monday, which means if you want the full 60 minutes, you need to start it by 10:59 p.m. because it's due at 11:59. If you submit it late, there's no kind of like percent reduction, right? For every hour, I know different professors, different things. It's a 0, right? The due dates and the due times in this class are hard, set. You need to make sure it's submitted before that due date and time. Otherwise, it's a 0. Okay, so make sure you're not waiting till the last second Monday night. Just kind of start those. So we'll have a total of 12 quizzes throughout the semester, right? So we're going to cover 13 modules, but I combine modules 5 and 6, so that gives us 12 different kind of quizzes. At the end of the semester, I drop your lowest 2. Okay, so throughout the semester, I don't do that until we have all 12 quizzes complete. So Canvas is always kind of like a worst case scenario. If I kind of do bad on one quiz, hopefully that's the one that gets dropped right at the end of the semester, but I don't update that until the end of the semester. Okay. I don't think there's anything else I want to say about any questions on this before we keep moving. Okay. The next kind of category I mentioned was these Canvas discussions. So they're 8% of your overall grade. We're going to have 5 of them throughout the semester. It's approximately every 2 weeks. It gets a little bit longer around weeks where we have exams, but usually about every 2 to 3 modules, I'll kind of post one of these. When I do, I'll talk about them more in depth and we'll kind of review them for a few minutes in class. But how many of you have done like discussion board things in high school? Quite a few, right? So these are discussion boards that are set up through Canvas. Excuse me. So each one is worth 16 points, 1.6% adds up to 8%. If you take all five. So what they will kind of look like is the following. So once I post them, I put up here, you'll have a minimum of a week. I don't think any of them, I only give you a week. Usually it's closer to 2 weeks from when I release them to when you have to submit them. So it gives you a little bit of time to kind of work those into your schedule and really think about those questions. When I post like my initial prompt or sets of questions to you, you will respond to that with your initial post or response. That's worth essentially half the points of those assignments. The other kind of quarter, other half of the points, a quarter of each, separating the two quarters, you would get 25% of the points from responding to another student's response, and then you have to do that to two other students. So, once we get to that first assignment, I'll kind of go through that in class. Instructions, I think, will be a little bit more detailed, but essentially you'll have your own initial post and then respond to two other students. So one thing I'm doing that's different than I think these discussion boards might look like that you've done before or in other classes is I'm not an idiot, and I know generative AI exists. And so what I see is a lot of students will just copy the questions I give them, put it in AI, and kind of put that as their response. So I got a lot of posts that look really, really similar, right? So what I'm actually doing with these discussion boards is kind of going to look at two different concepts. So I'm using them as a discussion board that you're kind of responding to my initial post and then kind of having some responses to other students to kind of give that artificial discussion. But I actually will give you in that initial prompt, like I will give you different things to tell generative AI tools. So in these assignments, you're going to be using, I'm telling you, use generative AI to do this. And so what the instructions going to kind of have you do is, okay, based on the responses you get, compare that to the concepts and topics we've talked about in class, and we're going to start trying to evaluate AI, right? Because it has these hallucinations, or what it, not the technical term, but kind of what they call these, where it gets things wrong, right? Because A, it's pulling from the web, which there's plenty of false things out there on the web, but also it's really sensitive to, and this isn't a whole course on AI, I might go on a tangent here for a second, but it's very specific, right, to the prompts that you give, right? In fact, sometimes if you alter your response to kind of lead it, it might give you the answer it thinks you want, not the actual kind of answer. Okay? And so I will give you specific prompts that you will all use in whatever generative AI tool you prefer, GPT, Copilot, Gemini. Part of these discussions will be that you then evaluate that response you got from AI. And then your response to other students, a lot of the time what that's going to look like is you either evaluate their evaluation of their AI tool, or you compare and contrast. The instructions might say, find a student who used a different generative AI tool than you did, and compare the answers that you got using the same exact prompt to what they got. And what we'll end up seeing is there's some differences, right? Or I might tell you to cater your own prompt, then compare that to other students, and you might see, oh, if I slightly alter the language that I'm giving AI, I'm getting a slightly different response. So I'm going to use these to kind of have this back and forth to evaluate your peers, but also they're heavily incorporating generative AI into these. Because, how many, you guys have probably had classes yesterday, hopefully not earlier today, it's an 8 a.m. I usually teach those and I know no one likes them. But how many of them have said something about you can't use AI tools on specific assignments? A lot, right? So I don't expect you to be using these generative AI tools on the quizzes, which is why I use those lockdown browsers, right? When it comes to these assignments, I'm building them into the assignment. I expect you to use them. In fact, I think we need to think a little bit harder about how to, and I say we, us as faculty, because this is where I think maybe some professors get a little bit lazy, just say you can't use it at all. Well, especially if you're a business student, if you get out of here and you don't use generative AI tools to assist you, not to do all of the work, because like I said, it can get things wrong, right? And it's very important you give it very detailed prompts. But if you don't learn how to use these tools, you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage once you get out there in the workplace, right? Because it can make you a more effective worker. So that's why I'm trying to incorporate it in this class so you can start to use it and start to see the pitfalls, but also the benefits of using this tool, okay? Any questions on that? Like I said, once we get to that first assignment, we'll kind of dive deeper in a more lengthy explanation of exactly kind of what is expected of you. I'm also going to have these kind of weekly module readings. So I didn't give you one for this first week because we haven't met yet. So module 1 is actually already up there on Canvas. You can kind of see every single week what I do is I kind of put up these modules. So I have the materials that we'll go through in class, right? So I've got like these outlines, which basically just bullet points the different learning objectives that we'll kind of have every week. I've got the slides. This week, we're looking at the syllabus, or I want you to have access to that. I then kind of have what are the assignments from this module, and then here's kind of that week 1 quiz materials, right? So I've already got that first module reading posted. It's not for any points. It's just for you to review that first chapter of the e-text and to see what these embedded questions look like. So if you open this up, hopefully it doesn't make me kind of sign in here. It might. Yeah. So this is like when you're registering for Top Hat, if you click that first assignment in Canvas, if you haven't already registered trying to, be very prepared for class, you would then kind of go to log into Indiana University. You might have to search that, but if you access it through Canvas, it should like autofill Indiana University in there. Now I've already got access to this class. Usually here you'll have to start following the prompts where it asks you for a join code. I'll show you that in a second. In fact, I think it's up here. For this section, it's 511079. That's the join code that you'll use, and I'll put up on the slides here in a second so it's larger. You then will ask you for an access code. That's going to be a code that you get when you purchase this. So if you've already purchased this to the bookstore, there should be an access code associated with that. Or if you haven't already purchased it, once you get on this Top Hat platform, after you put in the join code, it'll ask you like to kind of check out. That's really kind of go through, pay for the e-text. It'll give you a course access, not a course. It'll give you your own access code at that point. That's the access code you'll use to then get into this e-text and start to be able to work on these different module reading assignments. So start making sure you're getting registered for Top Hat, you're getting all of that set, because the very first module reading will be for next week's material module 2. So every week I will post the following week's module Thursday after class. You will then have to the end of the day Monday, similar to the module quizzes, where by the end of that day, you have to submit that module reading. Now, I will have the due date not to be timed, not be 11:50, but 11:59, but 11:50. So I have like a 9-minute buffer because it needs to kind of sync these up to Canvas. Essentially, it's still due at the end of the day, but it has to be a little bit prior to the end of the day, right? 11:50 will be the due time for these module readings. Okay. Now, after you go through these steps, if you have any issues getting registered and getting access to this e-text on Top Hat, reach out to me. There's a technical support, contact you can try to reach out to, because I'll try to respond as quickly as possible. But I have 2 large sections and another kind of half as large section of this class. So I try to be as quick as I can with emails. But given that I'm in the classroom a lot, and given the number of students I have, you might not get a response within 5 minutes, right? So if you want a quick response, that technical support, just like any other program, or even if, like your bank thing, or if you need to call support, there's a link up there. Once you get on Top Hat, you might get a quicker response from them than me. Okay? But try to get on as quick as possible so we can kind of iron out any of those issues if you do have some like compatibility issues with your device. But that's not a very common thing. Just I'm mentioning that just in case there's a few of you where that happens. So what I wanted to show you, like in this first one, now this first one's going to be a little bit weird because it's not an actual assignment. I just have it set for review. These questions where they're like open-ended and we're just asking for like an opinion. So some of these questions, you can get all the points by simply putting a response in here. There's no right or wrong answer. This is asking you for your opinion or what you think the term economics means. In this first assignment, it won't allow you to type anything in there because this isn't assigned for homework, right? In an actual assignment, you would then just kind of type in what your response to the question is. For a question like this, you'll get full credit just for responding with something. Okay? Now, most of them are not like open-ended opinion questions. Let's see, scroll down here. A lot of them are like multiple choice or select all that apply, right? So for those, there are correct answers. Now, for every single question, you get 3 attempts. If this is like a multiple choice question with 4 answers, if you're trying at all, hopefully you should be able to get that correct. Right? Also, there's no time limit on these. I'm not expecting you go through this entire e-text, like taking hours to go through it. What I'm using these module readings for is, yeah, if you have a question, I might expect you go back to the previous 2 paragraphs, kind of skim them, read them a little bit. Okay, this is what it's talking about. I can now answer the question. Okay? So the way I'm using these module readings, because I'm putting them out there before we cover the material, I'm using them more to you can kind of prepare for class, making class time more effective. You can focus more on what you found confusing with some of these questions. And I always I'm kind of priming your brain to what those next concepts we're going to talk about in the following week. Okay. So if you go through these, you get a few wrong. Yeah, I've got a couple guesses and I end up getting it right, but I don't really understand it. That's okay. Right. I'm just trying to get you to think about the topic we're going to talk about, the types of questions we'll see, so that we can make class time more effective in the following week. And this is kind of what it looks like. Those questions are embedded in the text. So, because we don't have a week 1, right, and I'm putting it out there just for review, we have 12 modules. Essentially, we'll have 11 of these, and at the end of the semester, I'll drop your lowest one. As long as you're putting effort into these, I see most students are getting definitely above 90%, but 95% of these points. I mean, a lot of them, right? That's because you get 3 attempts at every single question. As long as you're getting these submitted on time, these should be, once again, I shouldn't say this, but easier points, right? Especially than the exam. So make sure, and when it comes to the quizzes and the Canvas discussion, I can't emphasize enough, make sure you're getting these done on time. Even if you're going, let's say it's 11:45, I'm shoot, I forgot to do the module reading. Get on there, fill things out as quick as possible, get something submitted. Because even 50% on assignments, they're not good for your grade. But man, zeros can quickly tank your grade. Okay? So make sure you're really paying attention to due dates and times. And if you open up the syllabus, now this is subject to change, especially with the Canvas discussions, depending on where we're at in class. They might change by a day or 2 in terms of when they're due. But I kind of have an outline about when all of those assignments in this class are going to be due. Okay? So you've kind of got an outline for how we're going to be progressing throughout the semester. Every week, though, doesn't change. You'll have a weekly quiz and a module reading due at the end of the day on Monday before we start class that following Tuesday. Okay. Any questions on this before I keep going? And if I didn't already say this, I dropped your lowest at the end of the semester. Okay, not your lowest 2 like the quizzes, but just your lowest. Any questions here before we keep going? Okay, yeah.
Best way to access that text code?
So usually it's if you click on that first assignment that's on Canvas, it should send you to the Top Hat platform. You'll select in the university, you'll sign in with your IU credentials. So for anything in this class that we're doing, don't use a personal email, use your IU username and password. And once again, when it starts to ask you for the join code, and I skip through this, where did I have? There it is. This is the join code for this class. When it asks you for an access code, that's the one that came with the e-text that you purchased. So once you purchase the book, it should give you an access code. If you're still having issues finding that, because I think sometimes you've already purchased that through the bookstore as part of enrolling for the class, you can talk to me in class or send me an email. I can kind of help you kind of go through the steps to find that access code. But it should be, once you kind of start working through this, signing with your IU credentials, it should prompt you either for that access code or prompt you if you haven't purchased the e-text yet, you to put it. But yeah, you can go to tophat.com, select any university, kind of go through these steps to find the section. But if you go to Canvas and click on that module 1 reading, that should send you, like I said, fill in Indiana University for you, ask you for that join code, and should get you connected pretty easy. And I put a link to, if you're having issues, you can kind of go click here and it should kind of send you through those steps as well. Any questions? This was that I saw another hand up here.
Oh, that's the picture.
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't went to the next slide. That was my favorite. Any other questions for me? So the only other thing I haven't talked about yet is in-class participation and attendance. Excuse me. So I already mentioned that I'll be using Canvas to do these in-class questions. So what this will look like, so these are going to be 4% of your overall grade. Just showing up and answering the questions gets you half the points for the day. Getting the answer correct gets you the other half. Okay? So if there's 2 points and you just respond to all the questions, you'll definitely get 1 point. As you get those questions correct, right, you're going to be able to kind of get closer to that full 2 points for that in class at the end of this quiz. Now, there's no like extra credit or if you attend additional days, but we'll have 24 class periods where I use these in-class quizzes. At the end of the semester, I'll drop your lowest 4. Now, the reason I do this is because essentially these 4 days you should think of as, well, not if I don't do well, it gets dropped, but think of them as sick days. If you do, if you come to every single class, it will be your 4 lowest. But the reason I build this in is because if you miss work once you're done with college, like you don't get paid for that day, right? So you have sick days that you have to use. These 4 days are your sick days. I don't want to have to ask you to give me documentation for a family member that died. Right? It's a personal day. You missed it, ends up being one of the 4 most dropped. If you have a very minor illness and you have to miss a class, maybe you went out the night before and you don't feel like going to class, then, right, this is going to be one of your 4 personal days or sick days. Now, if you have like extenuating circumstances that keeps you out for several class periods, like, I don't know, let's say you end up in the hospital for pneumonia or something like that, obviously you'll have some documentation. You can kind of work out those extenuating circumstances if it's something that keeps you out for a prolonged period of time. So what these will look like is kind of come back here to Canvas. So the first one that we'll do, and it won't be for any points, is next class on Thursday. So you'll get an idea about kind of what this will look like. There we go. So I've got this first week in-class quiz. We won't start these in-class quizzes for points until next Tuesday. There's still kind of some add drops. In fact, there's quite a few empty seats here. That might not be the case on Thursday. I know it won't be the case on Thursday because I was told that, right? So what it's going to look like is I'll pull open one of these quizzes. I'll kind of come down here. I'll get into the quiz. I already have that due date set and the due time, depending on when we're at in class. Sometimes I'll use them at the end. Sometimes I'll use them halfway through. Sometimes I'll use them at the beginning. So if I'm using it at the beginning, that means I'm expecting that every day you're here on time, right? Because we might do one of these quizzes at the very beginning, right? They're not open throughout the entire class. What I would then do is once I open this up, I go to settings. I'll have an access code for the day, right? So on Thursday, this will be the access code we use. I'll show that to all of you. You can use that to get into that Canvas quiz. I'll adjust the time limit depending on how much time I want to give you. Excuse me. Usually I have an idea about what that's going to be, so I already have that set. And then I'll come down here, I'm going to hit return. I'll publish it. It shows up, we'll start the quiz. You'll then have a certain amount of time. So I'll kind of go back here. This one, I think I had 5 minutes. We'll kind of see what this looks like Thursday. It's not like difficult questions Thursday, so it shouldn't take us very long. I usually kind of go to this preview. So I have the kind of questions up here. You can see them on your device. We can kind of work on them for the next 5 minutes. Don't expect it to be quiet. In fact, hopefully you're working through it, but then like talking to the people around you, like trying to kind of collaboratively work on some of these questions. They shouldn't be too difficult, right? They're not meant to be like really difficult questions. It's more of we just covered this material. Here's a very similar problem. Can you work through it and get to the correct answer? Now, not every single time, but sometimes I will even like work through some of these for you so that as long as you're in class and paying attention, it should be easy to get that correct answer, right? So these are not meant to be like really difficult points. They're meant more so to make sure you're in class. Once again, creating incentives for you to actually physically be in class because I look at data and I know that there's a strong correlation between class attendance and performance on the exams. So I'm trying to motivate you to be in class because I know it's good for you, right? It's like your parents making you eat vegetables, right? You don't want to do it, but they're doing it because they know it's good for you, okay? Also, we'll preview some of the questions here. So, this one will be pretty easy. That's not for any points. Usually it'll be related to class content, okay? So that should kind of cover every category in terms of how you're graded. Any other questions before we keep moving? And so this is where I mentioned you'll have to have a device that can access Canvas so you can take these quizzes in class.
Do the Canvas quizzes usually take 60 minutes? Or-
The weekly quizzes?
Yeah.
I mean, it's individual specific. I don't think for most people it would take you the full 60 minutes. But because you have 60 minutes, if I work through a problem once and I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure, it might be good to return back to it if you have extra time. So I would say, depending on the week, probably not going to take you the full 60 minutes. Usually it's 30 minutes or so. But someone as you get towards the end of the semester, I tend to see people take a little bit longer because we're covering more difficult concepts. In fact, one question I didn't get, which I usually do, so I want to mention it now, is on those exams. They're not cumulative. So each exam is just over the previous 4 modules that we covered. So midterm 1, module 1 through 4. I combine module 5 and 6. So module 2 is 5 through 9. And then the final exam would then be modules 10 through 13. So I say it's not cumulative. Once we get to the final, I'm not asking you the types of questions we had in module 3. But I'll tell you right now, maybe this is really important that you show up for that module 3 week. We literally take module 3 and we just build upon it for the rest of the semester. So I always say that the exams and the material in this class, it's not cumulative in the sense that I'm not asking you the types of questions you saw in modules 1 and 2, but it is comprehensive. Because as we progress week to week, everything builds on itself. All right, we continually are taking the old models that we used and throwing in now some additional kind of more complex issues. Okay. Any questions on it?
Modules after can't get back into user practical.
So, good question. So, for the quizzes, I have the answers set to be released after the due date. So you can't view them right after you take it. In fact, you won't even be able to see like which questions you missed, but you will be able to once that due date passes, right? Because if I let you see that ahead of time, what do you think people are going to do? Week to week, my buddy might do it first, and then I, so you can see those results after that due date and time passes, and then go back and review. Yep. Any other questions? I thought I saw another hand. Yeah. You have to speak up a little bit. So if you have accommodations, you need to reach out to me individually. Yep. Oh, one more hand, maybe. Yeah.
What was the name of that textbook? Just one more time.
So I think it's Introductory Economics for Business. Let's see here. Where do we go? Got the official title up here. If you click on that first link, it should take you there. So Introductory Microeconomics by Paul Graff. Where will we get? Any other questions before we keep moving here? We got on time. Okay. All right. So just some kind of more details about the class. I have these kind of Canvas lectures that I post every single week. I also use Canvas to put announcements up. So this will be anything related to class. Sometimes it'll be like just reminding you the exam is coming up or things like that. Or if it's anything that maybe I forgot to mention in class or something that happens, like let's say, I don't know, for some godforsaken reason, I fall and break my leg walking to class, I might put it out of the Canvas announcement that lets you know like class is canceled today. So I'll use Canvas announcements to get any information out that I would need to get to you that I would want to mention in class, but it's in between classes. So make sure you're looking at Canvas for announcements that usually should kind of notify you if I put one out there. But I only try to use those for important class information. In terms of kind of asking questions outside of class, so I've got 2 TAs assigned to this class. If your last name starts with A through K, I want you to email from this first one, L through Z, the second. That just kind of makes sure that they're not getting an influx of emails from either one of them, and that they can get a quicker response to you. So once again, I said earlier, I try to respond as quickly as possible. They're likely going to be able to respond a little quicker than I am. If they can't answer your question, they will probably then reach out to me and I'll kind of follow up and respond to you. They also are going to have office hours. I don't know that they're not set in stone yet. I'm kind of gathering this information. They're kind of seeing what their schedule looks like in this first week. I'll have their office hours by the end of this week on Friday. I'll then repost this set of slides and repost the syllabus. That'll have their office hours, their day, time, and location. Okay? So those should be up in that syllabus updated by the end of the day Friday. Their office hours will start next week. Okay? And they're all grad students, so they're more than prepared to be able to ask your questions in terms of content. You can always email me using my email, which is rlant@iu. But it's easier for me to have kind of things for each section kind of in one place. So if you can kind of send emails through Canvas's email, not setting, but like over on the tab, there should be kind of a place where you can email through Canvas. It always kind of puts it in my inbox anyways, but it's a little bit easier for me to tell it's coming from a student. I try to be able to respond to that a little bit quicker than maybe some emails that don't require my immediate response. You can, and once again, you can email the TA. Try to do that first, but if you want to reach out to me, you can always email me as well. I put up the course YouTube kind of page again. I already mentioned this, but this is where I will put all the class recordings. I'll try to get them up as quickly as possible. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for them to compile. So usually they'll be up sometime Tuesday and Thursday afternoon after class. I just don't give you an exact time because sometimes it takes a little bit longer for them to compile and to upload. Okay? But they should be up by the end of the day on Thursday or Tuesday after we have class. The other thing that we'll have here kind of help assist you in class are these things called collaborative learning sessions, right? So I put TBD here. I'll mention here in a second because essentially every single week there are undergraduates who have gotten who have done well in this class before, who are then going to upperclassmen that are going to lead these CL sessions. They'll be every Tuesday and Monday night, right? So after class Thursday, you'll have 2 different opportunities to attend one, right? I've got the times and the days that they'll take place. In fact, I know that these are going to be different. So this one is no longer 7:40. This one's going to be 4:10. So I'm still working some things out scheduling wise and with my with the people that are leading these. So I'll get this updated as soon as I have kind of this information. But I tentatively should be able to know that after that. Some emails come through this morning. So Thursdays here, instead, they'll be the exact same time block now as the Monday sessions. It's got shuffled a little bit from when I created these slides. So I'll repost this syllabus later today with kind of those updated and also a couple of locations moved. So I'll make sure those are updated later today. So you know exactly what those date times and locations are going to be. If they, for some reason, change by the end of the week, I'll let you know that. I'm hoping at this point they don't, but I'm not in terms of scheduling for every single classroom, and so it's a little bit difficult in terms of like when there's times and rooms available on campus. So that should be updated by the end of this week at the very latest. You are not like assigned to any one section. You can attend any one of these that works for you. You can change which one you attend week to week. Now, what I'll do is every single one that you attend, if you were to attend all of them, you could get a total of 1.5 points added to your grade, or essentially extra credit points. So that means that every single week there will be these opportunities. You have what, 0.125, so it seems really small, right? Seems like a very small percent. If you go to all of them, 1.5%, once again, if you're on that cutoff, a B plus and an A minus, or a B and a B plus, that can make the difference. So not only is it going to hopefully help your grade, but it's also going to help you learn the material, right? It'll hope, you're going and paying attention while you attend these. You're not only getting the extra credit, you should be then performing better on the quizzes and then subsequently perform better on the exams. So once again, similar to in-class attendance, I find a pretty strong correlation between attending these CL sessions and performance on exams. Now, when you go to these, they'll have kind of a sign-in sheet. So they'll, kind of write your name down. That's what I can verify with that CL leader that you've attended that. They'll kind of then get that to me and I'll get these points updated. Okay. Now you can't get like multiple points each week. So this is, you get the extra credit for that week from simply attending one of that week's sessions. You go to 2 or 3, you can do that, right? Just to get more practice, but you're only getting extra credit once for that week. Is that clear? Any questions on this? So I will actually have another quiz that I'll kind of, yeah.
Where it's a guided learning or do you send you specific ones?
Yep. So I'll kind of, we'll get to that in just a second. So a question from that. So every single week, what this is going to look like is I put up for every quiz, just like for the exam, I'm going to put up a set of practice problems. So I already have the practice problems for week 1. I think I showed this to you earlier, but they're already existing down here. So I'll get these posted actually after class today. I just didn't want to overwhelm people before the first day of class without mentioning them. So every week I'll post these practice problems. You kind of know they should be pretty representative of what the quiz questions will look like. So if you attend one of these CL sessions, yes, I post the answers, but it's kind of like generative AI. I ask a question, I get the answer. What the hell is happening in between? I need to understand the process of how I got to that final answer. So what they'll do, I give them solution files where they work out how you arrive at that final correct answer. So you can see kind of the different graphs you would then want to draw for yourself in taking the quiz or taking the exam. And they give you like more insight into what's happening from the question to the final answer. Now they can also answer questions you have about those problems along the way, like what if this changed? But they're essentially kind of guiding you or walking you through that set of practice problems for the week. But then also, if there's additional questions, they can kind of go off, off script, so to speak. Any other questions about these collaborative learning steps? So I believe I'll have them solidified, even if they're not for sure 100%. Thursday, I'm going to actually, after class today, I'll post what the kind of current daytimes and locations are. And I want you, if you can, by the end of the week on Friday, not for any points, it's kind of like a survey on Canvas, but if you can fill it out just so I get an idea about if there's going to be any daytimes locations that are like more heavily trafficked, I want to make sure, because I'm right now, given the number of CL leaders I have, I'm not sure every single one of these will be filled. These are the tentative daytimes locations, but if I get some responses from you guys about which ones are going to be the most popular, it kind of helps me make that selection. So you'll see what looks like a quiz pop up on Canvas after class today, but it's just kind of to gather. There's no right or wrong answers. It's not for any points. It's just a way for me to gather data from you about what the preferences look like and where what your strongest preferences are in terms of days and times. And maybe locations, but most of your freshmen, it's probably hard to know exactly what where locations are. In fact, and to be honest, I had to look up where some of these are to make sure that the distance between them for some of the leaders isn't very far. Okay? I also put up a link down here. There is free economics tutoring through the econ department. I forget for this semester, I don't think they've put out the exact day and time. Usually it's like Wednesdays in the evening. But that link, they'll kind of get that hopefully updated by the end of the week as well. Once it's solidified, I'll probably mention it in class. So it's free tutoring through the econ department. Now it's not specific to this class like the collaborative learning sessions are. It's just kind of a graduate student, they're answering questions for this class, but also like, econometrics and some of these higher level econ courses, but that's available. And then, the university, I think, has a portal where you can find like paid tutoring. I don't think with all these resources, you shouldn't have to get to that point, right? With the collaborative learning sessions, being able to stop by my office hours, attend these free tutoring, I think that should be more than enough resources for the vast majority of you. In fact, I skipped over something. Let's see, what slide did I have it on? Probably way up here. Oh, did I not put it in here? I should have somewhere. Class participation, communication. No, looks like I forgot to put it in. Oh, here it is. So we're not quite there yet. I mentioned office hours. I'll get to those here in a second. So one thing I want to kind of bring up at this point, and this isn't really material yet, but especially kind of related to those Canvas discussions, but also things that we're going to talk about in class. So we're going to discuss a lot of different things that you could have opinions on, right? So we're not trying to evaluate what the right or wrong political opinion is in this class, right? We might evaluate some tools that the government has, but we're just kind of evaluating what those tools, the effect that they would have. We're not saying one is right or wrong. So they might be things like, should we tax cigarettes or not? Well, we know if we tax something, people want to buy less of it, but are we unfairly treating people that want to smoke versus those that don't, right? That's a more philosophical, political discussion. We're just going to evaluate, well, what is the effect of taxing cigarettes? Right? Or comparing different structures of the government. We won't really focus that in this class. This would be more like a B252 topic. But we're not saying communism is better or worse than capitalism, but they each have their own benefits and costs, right? So some countries kind of went towards communism because there are certain effects that are actually attractive for society. Okay? But we're not saying one is right or wrong. We're just evaluating them. So when it comes to like these Canvas discussions, you know, or you're, I don't know, working outside of class, like let's keep things like civil, right? We're not trying to get in these deep political debates in class here. We're just trying to evaluate these tools, right? And a lot of the times, like there's no right or wrong answer for different economic questions. In fact, once we get to module 3, we'll even see sometimes we're evaluating these models, like even the outcome is indeterminate. Sometimes the outcome is the answer. Well, it depends on different factors. So, you know, let's just kind of keep that in mind throughout the semester. We're really just trying to evaluate these different decisions that either the government makes, individuals make, etc. I put up here a summary of the important deadlines for this class, the exam dates. There's an add drop deadline at the end of the week. And then there's kind of withdrawal deadline if you want to withdraw from the course without like, I forget what they call it, but like basically with a withdrawal in your official transcript. I kind of put the date up there to see you kind of have that you know, information. So how do you succeed in this class? Let me drag. Sometimes YouTube gets, or sorry, YouTube. Sometimes Zoom gets annoying here. I try to keep it out of the way. So read the book, or at least kind of skim through it enough to answer those embedded questions, to kind of prepare yourself for the class, and make sure you're getting some of these easier points to help boost your grade from those module reading classes, module readings before class. Okay? Make sure that you're showing up, getting those, once again, relatively easier points from these in-class participation quizzes, and then practice, practice, practice. When you're thinking about taking these quizzes or exams, I'm giving you practice problems each week for those quizzes. I'll give you practice exams for those exams. Often not just one, but 2 practice exams. So those are meant to be the best way to prepare for those exams, and to prepare for those quizzes. These practice problems, sometimes they're old questions I used on old exams and quizzes. So they're meant to prepare you for the types of questions you'll see when we actually get to the quizzes and the exams. So make sure you're working through those to prepare. Take the Canvas quizzes seriously. Once again, you have more resources available to you on those than you are during the exam. On the exam, you won't have any notes, right? You won't have any outside materials. And so take those very seriously. Try to get as many of those points as possible. To the question earlier, you get through them in 15 minutes. Don't just let 45 minutes go to waste. Maybe kind of go back and review them, make sure you're getting everything correct. Okay? So, right, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I kind of already mentioned this earlier. You start missing weekly quizzes. I drop your lowest 2, but like you miss 3, those zeros start to impact your grade. It can bring it down very quickly. Okay? So make sure you're getting these assignments done on time, getting as many of these points as possible. Don't be afraid to ask questions. So I outlined TAs. They're going to have their office hours. You have these collaborative learning sessions, your kind of generalized economic tutoring. But also, like, I'm a main resource, right? So I put here my office hours. I know they're a little bit early, but Monday and Wednesdays, I'll be over in my office from 8 to 11. You don't have to schedule anything. You just drop by, first come, first serve. There's multiple people. Sometimes we'll work through things together, which can be beneficial because sometimes the questions you have might be a little bit different, but like you're like, oh, I actually have that same question. I didn't even realize. So office hours is a really good time to get your questions answered, especially leading up into those exams. I tend to see a lot more people dropping by, but don't wait till the exams. Feel free to stop anytime if you have questions over class material. Sometimes I'll have people stop by that are working, I don't know, on like their own private. Someone stopped by who was working on like NBA player efficiency stuff. not really related to the class. They're like, oh, I've things you mentioned, I thought you might know how to like work with this data. So always feel free to stop by. I have a link. So during this time slot, you don't have to come by in person. You can also kind of log on to Zoom and use this link with every Monday, Wednesday from 8 to 11. It would kind of enter you in. I'll have Zoom pulled up on my second screen. If I see you then enter in, I can kind of work with you virtually as well. And this is a big campus. Sometimes it might be a little bit easier to use that option. So I'm over in Wiley. I think it's that way. I might have got turned around in terms of, but it's very close. So if you guys know where Ballantine Hall is yet, the old big building, I'm like up the hill. It's in one of those little small brick buildings. Okay. So I'm up on the third floor. I enjoy lecture. I enjoy the back and forth, but I really enjoy office hours. So I want to help, right? So don't be afraid or I don't know. I think sometimes like freshmen also get, I don't want to say scared, all right? You don't want to come in and, oh, I want the professor thing. I don't know what's going on, or I'm a little bit intimidated. Hopefully I don't come across that way. Maybe when I'm talking about deadlines, due dates, and times, it might seem that, but like I want you to stop by. Don't be hesitant about that at all. Okay. So help me help you. Okay? Excuse me. So we'll dive in a little bit here. Just to kind of round out class into some kind of generalized economics topics. Won't be too in depth. We'll kind of pick up, really jump into module 1 in class on Thursday. So when it comes to that first quiz, there'll be like approximately half the questions will be over module 1. It's relatively short. The other half will be really just things we talked about with the syllabus. So make sure you're kind of reviewing that syllabus document. That'll help you. Now, most of the information is in the slides as I summarized it, but you can kind of have that Word document to assist you in answering those syllabus type questions on the week 1 quiz as well. Any other questions before we keep moving? Okay, so economics at its core is basically how individuals or countries, governments, or firms make decisions facing scarce resources. Okay, so you can think about this as you have like your ideal car that you can buy. I always said mine would be like a 78 Trans Am. Right? Why don't I go out and buy that car? Or why wouldn't you go out and buy your ideal car? Because you don't have enough money, right? You have a scarce resource, right? You need to eat. You need to pay for, your where you're living, right? You only have a certain amount of dollars, so you have to prioritize. Okay? So firms face the same decisions. They've got a certain number of workers. They have a certain number of production facilities. I have to pick and choose what I'm doing. I only have a certain number of workers. I'm only going to be able to produce a certain amount. Or if I have multiple goods I'm producing, I can only produce this good that sells for a higher amount than the one that sells for slightly less. If I had more workers, I'd like to produce more, but I face a scarce resource. Right? So, we can think of scarce resources sometimes money, it's sometimes time that you have. Why don't you sit and play video games all day? Because I have to do things like attend class, right? I only have a certain number of hours in a day. So what ends up happening is anytime we make a decision, there's also going to be trade-offs. If I use my money to go buy lunch, maybe I don't have any money left to go buy Starbucks, right? Or if I use my time to go to class, I don't have as much time to play video games or whatever the situation, whatever the example would be. So that's at its core what we're going to be doing throughout the entire semester. Now, most of this I'll put like in an individual context first, because it's easy to think about like individual choices because we're all individuals. But we'll then kind of take that and also look at like how do firms make decisions. Okay. There's also going to be a difference between micro and macroeconomics, right? So this class, I always kind of say you could rename it to be Introduction to Microeconomics for Business. Module 2, I taught B252 as well. If you hopefully end up taking it after this class, the early modules will look very similar, right? So we'll have a little bit of macroeconomics at the beginning of the semester, but then very quickly progress towards microeconomics. So macroeconomics is more of like, how are things happening overall in a country? Microeconomics, we're like honing in on individual decisions, firm decisions. So we're looking like, down, very, very, a small field as opposed to the entire economy overall. So one thing I like to mention at this point, kind of interesting. Like you can take our microeconomic principles and you can really apply them to a bunch of different sectors. So you could look at the labor market, you could look at the healthcare market, right? And if we can understand firm and individual decisions, we can really look at this in a variety of different areas. In fact, I kind of mentioned already when I said that student dropped out of my office. Some of the research I do is actually looking at how the microeconomics is applied to sports data or sports questions. And if you don't like sports, you can think about like how is it applied to like sometimes what do art museums do, right? Or different musicians, right? Anything you're interested in, you could probably apply microeconomic principles to. Right? So one of the main things we'll talk about when individuals and firms make decisions, we assume that they're operating and making self-interested, rational decisions. So knowing all the costs and benefits that exist from making these different, knowing the trade-offs that exist, they're making decisions that make them better off, self-interested, right? Now, just because those decisions make them better off, you might start to say, well, then why do we see, nonprofit organizations? They're not making money off of that. Well, what are they trying to maximize? Not profits, but how much good they do. Right? Why? Because helping others is bringing them joy. It's in their best self-interest. So every individual, like, why do some of us choose to litter? Because we don't give a shit about the environment, right? Why do other people don't? Well, because their self-interest, they don't like to see, terrible looking society. And so we all act out of our own self-interest, right? Not the social interest, right? So more money, more time, more happiness is how a lot of people act. Firms, a lot of the times, it's the bottom dollar, right? We're maximizing, all we care about is increasing profits, right? But some companies realize that's not all we care about. We care about making society a better place, okay? So sometimes our self-interested decisions don't end up at the socially optimal decision, right? So I always kind of think about the best example of this is, a lake that's got all kinds of trash in it. So we can keep going here. I have to go to 10:50. So I'll go through a little bit more and we'll kind of end class here. I've got a couple things I want to say at the very end. So as soon as I'm getting off the slides, don't think you pack up and ready to go. I've got a couple of things I want to mention before we get out of here. So when people face these scarce resources and they start making these self-interested rational decisions, we're always going to have trade-offs. We said if I take my time to do one thing, I don't have that hour, I can't, do something else with it. Or if I take the $10 in my pocket and I buy lunch, I don't have that $10 to spend again, right? So anytime we make a decision, we're not doing something else. If I go to eat at Chipotle, I'm not going to eat at Chick-fil-A. Now, if I'm making a self-interest rational decision, I'm going to the place that I like the most, right? But I'm always giving up going somewhere else for lunch, or I'm giving up whatever I use my resources for. I'm not using them for something else. So we're going to call this an opportunity cost. Anything we do, there's a cost associated with it. So I always give the kind of example, let's think about if I have someone says I have a free ticket to an upcoming concert, right? Well, I can go to that concert. It's free. I don't have to pay for the ticket. Well, it's not free because if I go, maybe I have to not do something else. Maybe I have to call off work. Well, what is the cost then to attending the concert? However much money I could have made working a shift, right? Whatever company I was working. So anytime we do something, anytime, even if what we call explicit cost, right? The money I have to pay to do it, even if it's free, there is a cost of my time, right? Or there is a cost of what I could be doing with that money I spent. Could be buying something else, right? Or thinking about time as well. If I take a certain number of hours and I'm doom scrolling through whatever social media platform I look at, the cost is I'm not taking that time to study. I'm not taking that time to, organize my expenses. I'm not taking that time to hang out with friends, right? And so anytime we choose to do something, there's always a cost. You might think TikTok or whatever you're scrolling through is free, but it's not. It's coming at a cost that you're not using that time to do something else that you would have enjoyed doing in your life. Now, if you're self-interested, you're doing the thing that you like the most, and what you're giving up is what you would like to do the second most. Right? But there's always a cost to what we're using our resources for. So we always say in economics, this is the kind of term that a lot of times pops up. There's no such thing as a free lunch. right? Even if someone is buying it for me, right? Well, if they're buying me, what's something they bought me something from Panera Bread. The cost is I don't really like that. I'd rather eat somewhere else. There's a high opportunity cost for me, taking this free lunch and not actually even going out to buy something I like more. Any questions over anything up to this point? So I think we'll stop here. I'll walk through an example kind of next class. But before we get out of here, a couple things I want to mention. So I will kind of post that collaborative learning preference survey, essentially. Once again, it looks like a quiz, but that's just because that's the only way I can download data from it. So make sure you're trying to get on that, and that you look at your schedule throughout the week. Try to get it submitted by Friday, just so I can kind of get those daytime locations solidified for the upcoming week. So those collaborative learning sessions won't start until next Thursday, right? Covering module 2 material. Something else I kind of wanted to mention before we get out of here. Once again, I can't reiterate enough. Make sure you're stopping by my office hours if you have questions. Also, keep an eye out on those Canvas announcements. If anything pops up outside of class, that's what I'm going to